Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the third online meeting of the Rapid Rehousing for Youth Learning Community. We're so glad to have you all here today. Just a reminder for the webinar format to minimize background noise. All lines are going to be muted except for speakers while they're presenting. But throughout the webinar, you can post your questions for speakers and provider panelists in the box on the right of your screen. And as you can see, this is our agenda for today. It's going to be a lot of great content. So let's go ahead and get started. As you know, today's webinar is going to be focused on the second core component of rapid rehousing, which is rent and move-in assistance. And we're excited to have some great experienced youth rapid rehousing providers joining us today, including Jody Jackson from Heartland Family Service in Omaha, Nebraska, John Lawlor from The Connection in Middletown, Connecticut, Kathy Tillotson from Build Futures in Huntington Beach, California, and Robin Meyer from Northwest Youth Services in Bellingham, Washington. And we're also really excited to have the Alliance's own Cynthia Najendra join us from our capacity building team. So to get us started, just a quick reminder again of why we're all here. We want to improve our knowledge and understanding of rapid rehousing for youth by learning from one another about effective programmatic and systemic responses in communities that use the model. And of course, this is even more important now because so many communities have recently been awarded a lot more funding for youth rapid rehousing. The most recent COC awards were a huge win for young people, and I know we all want to make sure that we provide the best rapid rehousing response that we can for these youth. So since this increase in capacity is such a powerful call to action on youth homelessness, we'll go ahead and get started. And we'll kick off today's learning with a presentation from Cynthia Najendra, Director of the Alliance's Capacity Building Team. Cynthia will be providing an overview of the core component of rent and move-in assistance. Cynthia, welcome. And I think you're going to get started just telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey into this work.
Thanks, Mindy. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Just to give you a little background about myself, as Mindy mentioned, I'm the director for our Center for Capacity Building here at the Alliance. And just to give you a little background on what the center does, the center works directly with communities to provide training and technical assistance in various system and program level content areas, with one of the primary areas being how to implement best practices in rapid rehousing. So we work with programs and communities all over the country to help design and implement best practices in rapid rehousing, but also we really benefit a lot by learning from communities and providers about what is working well and innovative practices that are being used and solutions to really tough challenges that many programs face. And we also kind of learn what's not working so well. So we use that information to inform our policy and our research work and improve our training to develop better practices to disseminate to other communities. So one of my first jobs actually in the field of homelessness years ago was actually as a case manager in a transitional housing program serving homeless adults ages 18 and up. And I wanted to just start off by recognizing that being a case manager and a staff person in a program, a rapid rehousing program, working with such a vulnerable population is just such an incredibly hard job, and that working as a rapid rehousing staff person is some of the most challenging work out there. And we know how tough this is, and that you are being asked to do so much, and that it's your dedication and your passion. We see that all of the time when we work with programs for ending homelessness that's really driving you, and we want to just thank you for that. I had many aha moments along the way since that job, understanding how transitional housing works and then kind of seeing how this rapid rehousing model worked, that kind of helped me to see the rapid rehousing is a really, truly effective way of helping people move quickly out of homelessness. And that's why I'm just very excited to be talking a little bit about it today. The rapid rehousing that we're going to be focusing on today is really focused on the rent and move-in assistance, as Mindy mentioned, but I want to just do a quick overview to kind of talk about the core components. As we all probably know, rapid rehousing is an intervention designed to help individuals and families to quickly exit homelessness, and that's really the goal, and to return to housing in the community and not become homeless again in the near term. So those are really the goals of rapid rehousing. And the three core components of a program are housing identification, move-in and rent assistance, and rapid rehousing case management and services. And while their programs look different from community to community, these are the core components that every program should have and represent kind of the minimum that a program needs to have to be considered a rapid rehousing program that is using best practices. And we sort of actually published standards beyond the core components that really kind of detail what the core components look like when you actually implement them into a program. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. The core components were developed, just if you wanted some background, in collaboration with and endorsed by the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, USICH, HUD, and the Department of Veteran Affairs. And recently we published these program standards that you can find on our website that will give you more details. Eventually, in the next few weeks, we're also publishing a rapid rehousing toolkit that should also kind of help you as someone who runs a program or maybe are funding a program or working with programs to improve practices to really look at what programs should be implementing. So today we're focusing on the second core component, rent and move-in assistance. So this is an infographic, maybe you've probably seen it before, that we like to use that describes what rapid rehousing is and key elements of the model, and explains rapid rehousing as simply as possible. It's kind of like your elevator pitch when you're at a party and someone asks you what you do for a living. Just tell them that rapid rehousing programs help people find housing, they help people pay for housing, and they provide the services to help people stay in permanent housing. So those are the core components that a program needs to have. And rent and move-in assistance, as we said before, is the second core component. And the goal of rent and move-in assistance is to provide short to medium-term help to households so that they can pay for housing. Activities include paying for security deposits, move-in expenses, rent, utilities, and sometimes things like furniture, move-in kits. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The intent of the rent and move-in assistance component is really to enable the quick resolution of the immediate housing crisis. We want to get people out of homelessness as quickly as possible. We know that the longer time people spend in homelessness, the more of a negative impact it has on them. So we want to end people's homelessness as quickly as possible, and rapid rehousing is designed to do this. And the majority of rapid rehousing participants are going to be able to maintain that housing with this rent assistance. And programs should start out by assuming that households, even those with very little income or zero income or other challenging barriers, are going to succeed with the subsidy and support rather than having a voucher, and can extend when necessary. There are times when people will need longer-term assistance, and the program will be able to sort of exercise their discretion in how to do that, because the model is very flexible, which is one of the great things about it. And households with higher housing barriers or no income may need assistance for different depths or durations, and households should still be assisted in really attaining permanent housing as quickly as possible, even though they have these high barriers. So we don't want to screen anyone out, in other words. We want to make sure that we are working with everyone who can use this kind of assistance. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides. And the program should sort of be attentive to the ability of a household to maintain the housing once the subsidy ends. But I want to make this note that program staff should not be entirely constrained by the attempt to kind of reach that rent burden of only 30% of a participant's income. It's just a standard that is not achieved by the majority of low-income and poor households, not just households living who are homeless, but just low-income and poor households really most often don't reach that 30%. So it's sort of helpful to recognize that once housed, the rapid rehousing households are just going to be better positioned to increase their income over time, even if they're not meeting that 30% right at the time of assistance. And I think it's important to remember, and I'm going to say this over and over, this is a really flexible model. You're going to see from all the providers that are talking today that there's a lot of different ways to do this, and I'm going to kind of try to distill some of the core components of that kind of ties them all together. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes to go over the recently released rapid rehousing program standards for rent and move-in assistance. And rent and move-in assistance is the second core component, as I said. And what we're talking about today is just a brief overview of the standards. So I really highly encourage folks to look at the standards. They're on our website, and really look at the details of how they're spelled out so that you can really get kind of the nitty-gritty of how they should be implemented. And they hopefully will be really helpful in spelling out your policies and procedures in your programs. As I said before, we're going to be coming out with a toolkit that should also help with that. So again, the intent of rent and move-in assistance, and I repeat this because it's important, is really about enabling the quick resolution of the immediate housing crisis. And because rapid rehousing is a crisis intervention, the assistance is really designed to help that household move through the immediate crisis and put them in this position to be able to successfully tackle other issues that they're struggling with, since it'll be much easier to do all of the things they want to accomplish when they're actually in their own housing first, right? So from there, they can set all kinds of goals as they choose. And rather than, so I often talk to case managers who have, or just staff from rapid rehousing programs who understandably have, a lot of anxiety about not being able to give folks help them with everything they need. I know people who come from a social work background. I definitely had these challenges when I was a case manager. It's feeling like, we're not giving them everything they need. So it's kind of something, it's kind of the shift that I try to help programs make, which is instead of focusing on, not being able to give not being able to give a household everything we might want to be able to give them, we're really trying to focus on what we can give them and realizing that what we can give them is actually very important and very helpful in kind of their path to housing stability. So just wanted to mention that. And the key to structuring rent and move-in assistance in rapid rehousing is that the assistance should be flexible and tailored to the varying and changing needs of a household while providing that assistance necessary for households to move out of homelessness and into permanent housing. So it's the flexibility that's so important here. The program should approach each household individually, and based on that household's individual strengths and circumstances, come up with an initial plan for assistance, but be able to be flexible about that plan, especially the duration, the amount of financial assistance, as the household's needs change. Sometimes someone had a job at the beginning of the program and they lose that job, but sometimes people start out with lower income and then they get a job. So assistance kind of should be flexible, and the program really should be able to kind of continually assess and work with that client to adjust the goals in their housing plan and what they're getting in assistance, so that the household's needs are always being met. So a little bit more about progressive assistance in the next slide. So this approach, often called progressive engagement, is used to determine the duration and amount of rent assistance. So in other words, financial assistance is not the standardized package. That's really what we are trying to distinguish this from. It's flexible enough to adjust to the household's needs, as I said, especially as people's financial circumstances or housing costs change or household size. All kinds of things are constantly in flux, right? So we want to be able to respond to those things and help the household with what they need as it comes up. So rather than giving each household 6 months or a year of assistance, for example, where every single person that walks through the door gets the exact same package, the program kind of explains to participants that the assistance is determined on a case-by-case basis, and that it can absolutely flex up if the participant shows a need for this help. So we don't want to, cause a lot of anxiety, but we want to make sure that the person feels supported. And this can, we've seen this from a lot of program staff telling us that this is often motivating for both program staff and participants to work towards the household's goals. I often use this example of your driver's license expiring, and if you know your driver's license is expiring, say, in July of 2017, a year from now, or at least if I knew mine was expiring in a year, I'm most likely going to wait till about, a month or two before to try to get my ducks in a row, maybe make the DMV appointment, make sure I have the money to pay for it, and sort of, whatever I need to do, clear all parking tickets, et cetera. But if I knew it was coming up a little bit sooner, I would probably start working towards those things sooner. So you're kind of trying to balance you know, giving people a certain amount of assistance with whatever anxieties they might be feeling so that they do feel like they have enough to start stabilizing. And finding that balance is really the key. So I know it can be anxiety producing to be on a more sort of medium-term rental assistance program because there are valid concerns on both the part of the program staff and the person or household receiving the assistance that they're not initially sure how they're going to maintain their housing on their own. They're coming in with a lot of fear, past, you know, evictions, they're not having a lot of success, so they're going to be you know, worried. And what we often try to really emphasize is that the majority of rapid rehousing participants are in fact able to maintain their housing with anywhere between 3 to 6 to 24 months of rent assistance. Really depends on the household. So the average we often see is around 4 to 9 months, depending on the person's situation. And this very well may be longer for youth and young adults, but this should be decided on an individualized case-by-case basis. So, you know, exactly what I said before, we just want to make sure that we're approaching each household individually. And you know, I've heard this from programs that are very effective in doing this. They try to turn the phrase, what if we're setting them up to fail, on its head by kind of thinking, well, we're providing the opportunity for the household to succeed, and if they need more help as they go along, we're going to provide that support as well. And coming from this strengths-based approach can really help that household through their own anxieties and see their own strengths rather than kind of focusing on their deficits. And again, I want to just emphasize that people, even with zero income, we see this all the time, there's a lot of data to support this, they can succeed even without a permanent voucher at the end. So programs can always start with a few months of assistance and extend as they need. Households with higher housing barriers may need longer assistance. And when you're using this approach, the household should be assessed periodically to determine if they need more or less assistance. And you're able to decrease or increase as needed. Next slide, please. So I think this slide is looking a little weird on this. I don't know if it transferred properly. So I'll just, at least on my screen it is, but this is a diagram to see how progressive engagement works. And I'll just explain it. Essentially, you're just, you know, starting off with a shorter or medium-term length of assistance, and then you can flex up as you assess them month by month or every couple of months. You're saying, like, okay, do you need more money? And then, you know, at the point where you're sort of getting to the point where you're about to max out on the limit of assistance you can give them, that's where you might say, is this a person that needs permanent supportive housing? Is this someone who needs just a longer-term kind of help or more intensive services? Like, this is not someone who maybe will be able to work and really does need a longer term level. But then you've sort of tried to help that person stabilize through that point, and at the point that it becomes very clear that they need more, then you kind of consider what the longer term option might be. So the other benefit to using a progressive engagement approach is that programs can serve more households this way. Especially a lot of our programs have such long waiting lists. We have youth, you know, living on the street, and we're trying to figure out how can we serve everybody we can possibly serve. So programs are saving the longer terms of assistance for the most challenged households in this model and providing a little bit less for those who can get on their feet faster. So this often enables you to serve more people rather than kind of giving everyone the same package of assistance. And given that these subsidies can vary and change from month to month, one of the challenges programs have is really, you know, budgeting. How do we budget when we're not giving kind of package assistance? So it's really important to track expenses really carefully and really routinely, update spending projections to make sure you have sufficient funds to remain through the end of a given funding source. So this takes a little practice. There are some basic tools we can send you that programs use, but budgeting can be challenging, and you know, you just, again, have to just work with your staff to make sure that they're kind of putting in each month what they're spending on each client. And actually, after operating for some time, programs can also assess what the average length of assistance is for households and use that average as a basis to project program costs for the following year. So, you know, you look back, you see, okay, we're spending about 8 to 9 months or 12 to 14 months. Like, we can use that as our average to kind of figure out what our budget looks like and how many households we can serve. So the program really provides, when needed, either directly or through formal agreement with another organization, financial assistance for housing costs, rental deposits, first month's rent, last month's rent, temporary rental assistance, and or utility assistance. And there's a lot of flexibility built in. Different funding streams are going to allow you to spend on different things, and the more sort of flexible funds you have to cover things, the better. So these are, again, from our rent and move-in assistance standards, to emphasize that most households, most homeless households, even with some income, just usually don't have money for startup costs, such as security deposits, utility deposits, furniture, movers, sometimes just linens, things that people need to move in and be able to really stabilize in their new home. And it can be kind of a barrier. Rental assistance sometimes just isn't enough. So a lot of rapid rehousing programs that are more effective at helping people obtain and sustain housing have these flexible funds to cover these kinds of needs. And basic furnishings, mattresses, kitchen items, cooking items, utensils. Some people use, this is where they get their volunteers or their donors to come in instead of donating toys or things that people traditionally donate around the holidays. People start asking for things like move-in kits. They work with local businesses to donate furniture, or they find funds to cover some of these items. And this can be incredibly helpful to alleviate the stress of moving into a new household. One more standard I kind of want to cover, but we will talk more about this, or I think this will be covered more in a later session about case management. But after closing the case, we want to make sure that the transition off of financial assistance is coordinated, really well coordinated with case management efforts to make sure that that participant is able to assume and sustain their housing costs and that they're not imminently at risk anymore of becoming homeless in the near term. So just some things to remember in closing. I often hear this, and I often I'm reminded of this, that consumers, our participants, our households have a resiliency that we can't always predict. And the reason I mention that is because I think we sometimes think, okay, I know that this household isn't going to make it, or I know this household is definitely, it can't make it, or we make assumptions about people, especially when we've been doing this for a long time. And I think that we've all had a household surprise us. We've had that household or that participant that we think, oh yeah, this person's going to make it. This person is, they have all of their kind of things together. They've got all their ducks in a row. They've got this great job. They're just going to be great. And then they don't, they're not able to stick it out in the program, or something happens. And then we have those folks that were like, well, this is just never going to work out. This person has too many challenges. I just can't see this working. And then they completely surprise us. So we just sort of can't forget about that kind of resiliency that these folks have. People who are experiencing homelessness are incredibly resilient at making things work. And they're not terribly different than folks that are living in poverty. And so, when we look at the majority of households who are living in poverty in the community, only a very small percentage of people living in poverty kind of become homeless. We want to remember that even though people are still having a lot of challenges when they're, getting rapid rehousing assistance and getting off of it, that they're incredibly resilient and often can make these things work to sustain their housing. I think the other thing to remember is that the subsidy is really to pay for housing. And while we want to be able to help folks with all of the challenges that they're experiencing, we only sort of have a short time with them. And we are giving them a foundation to really work with all of the other challenges in their life, and we're trying to connect them to all the services they need to continue to work on those issues. But this is really focused on housing, and we want to make sure that that's the first thing that we're really able to support them with. I think that we should also remember that while it would be amazing for everyone to get a permanent subsidy afterwards, we just can't count on that. There's just not enough there's just not enough vouchers in any community. So we need to sort of really be thinking, okay, there might not, there probably isn't a permanent subsidy at the end of this. So we need to do everything we can to help support this household sustain their housing. And the progressive engagement model, finally, is just really about flexibility and really paying attention month by month to where that household is and treating each household individually. Flexibility is key. I think I've said most of these things already, and again, financial assistance really can be, can be for a longer duration when it's needed, and it just needs to be evaluated from month to month. And you might actually have different types of rent and move-in costs for young adults. There might be things that young adults need that older adults don't need, and I think you can think about that in your program. I think we'll probably hear about that from our providers today, about what those things might be. I think, Mindy, if you don't mind, we can skip this slide because I think I've kind of covered this, but just generally that there are lots of programs out there that, have, you can consult with to see what their average time in rapid rehousing is, what their average time is in financial assistance, and kind of get a sense for maybe what your program might need to be structured like. Some of the things that people ask, to make sure that they're, stable in the place before they exit is whether people are able to pay their rent for the next month. Is anyone maybe staying with people who are not on the lease? Things that are really, going to be good questions to ask after they're off of your assistance. Are you following your lease? Are there any other issues like health or child-related issues that might be interfering with your housing? Do you have support from family, from friends, from community services? Do you have what you need to keep your housing?
Great. Thank you again, Cynthia. Again, we're so glad that you were able to join us today and share your expertise with the community about this really important core component of rapid rehousing. And everyone, Cynthia will be remaining on the call to join us for the Q&A session. And we've already got some great questions from you guys already. You can continue to enter questions throughout the presentation in the box on the right hand of your screen. And now, as always, we want to look at how this core component plays out in the various programs that have been serving young people in rapid rehousing for a while. So we decided for this webinar to have each of the individual providers kind of give us an overview of their program's financial assistance packages. And we'll go ahead and get started with that with Jody Jackson from Heartland Family Service in Omaha. Jody, are you on?
Yep, I'm here.
Yay, okay, no technological difficulties this time. So Jody, can you take us through how your program implements this second core component? And just let me know when you're ready for me to forward to the next slide.
Okay. Yep, so we have a program specific to youth doing rapid rehousing that we've had for about the last 6 years. So in that program, and all of our rapid, we just use 30% of their gross income is what they pay towards their housing costs. So that's the piece that the client pays, and if utilities aren't included, we just take that utility allowance from their inspection off the amount that they pay. We just have an Excel sheet that figures that out for us. We can help with application fees, utility deposits, moving costs is all just as needed. So if we look at their budget, they don't have the funds to cover that, then that's something that we'll offer. Utility assistance we provide if their portion of rent comes to a negative number, then that's the amount we'll reimburse them each month for utility bills. If they have a utility bill, then they just turn that in at their case management meeting, and we'll put up to that amount towards their utility costs. How long we're assisting them, it just depends on need. So we try and use that progressive engagement model. They don't get approved for more than 3 months at a time. So up to 3 months, but not necessarily 3 months, just depends on their need and their situation. So every 3 months we do kind of a formal review, verify their income, refigure out that amount that they pay. In between then, if they need more assistance, then they just bring the case up and we can approve them for more assistance as needed in between. The maximum that we work with people is 12 months, generally from project entry, but we will extend beyond that 12 months. It's pretty rare that somebody actually gets to 12 months, and pretty rare that we need to extend them, but that does happen sometimes as long as they have a plan in place. Like if somebody's got a voucher and they're going to get it next month, or they just started a job and their paycheck hasn't came through, but they have a plan, then we can extend them for a month or another couple months. That being said, the average is about 5 months, and our youth program is about how long we have them before they discharge. You can go to the next one. So funding source, we have the COC grant. We actually just got that this year. Prior to that, we've operated off of private foundation funding through Nebraska Children and Families Foundation, which is an organization that focuses on youth, and we specifically get funding for former wards through that foundation. So it's a little bit different eligibility criteria for both of them. We use progressive engagement to figure out how long we're going to be working with them. So we use that for the financial assistance. We approve them for the minimum amount that they need, and we extend it as it's needed. As far as services, we don't necessarily use a progressive engagement model for services. Everybody's provided services. Housing search, while they're searching for housing, we're meeting with them on a weekly basis, at least, to help with housing search. And then once they're in housing in the program, the minimum is monthly, but especially in our youth program, we tend to see them more frequently. So we usually try and recommend a couple times a month, although it's really up to the youth how often they would like to meet. But we keep caseloads a little bit smaller in the youth program because we do tend to meet with them more frequently. But the goal is just to connect them to resources that they're going to have long term after we're not with them any longer. So that was really quick.
Thank you, Jody. I think that covered all the bases, though, so thank you for sharing that information with us. And next we'll take a quick trip over to John Lawlor, if I can figure out how to unmute you. I think I unmuted you, John. And John is from the Connection in Middletown, Connecticut, so he's going to tell us about how their program, financial assistance, works. And again, we'll just go, let me know when you're ready to move to the next slide.
Okay, great. So in terms of the rental assistance that we provide, we took more of a sliding scale approach, and the slide shows kind of an example of what we present to our youth at the time that they come into our program. So as you can see, the percentage of the total cost of the rent that they pay increases gradually over time. And we did this as opposed to the more income-based, just so that way they can get gradually exposed to that kind of growing financial responsibility that comes with emerging into an adult. It also avoids some of the dynamics where the thinking that if you make more income, you'll have to pay for this. For the way that we've structured it, that thought process really doesn't occur with the youth. When we used to run it based on an income-based rent calculation, we used to hit issues with that here and there. So at the time of entry, we present this with to our youth right off the get-go, depending on different numbers of apartments that they're looking for. The example I put was 850, which is probably about the standard one-bedroom apartment that you find in most areas of Connecticut. Connecticut can be a very high renter price market, so that number is subject to go up depending on area of the state. But what we try to aim to do is get youth paying a small amount pretty early. So most of our youth at program entry don't have jobs or whatnot, so they might not be paying any portion for the first couple months until they get some employment. But the reason that we want them to pay some amount fairly early on is that the missed rental portion payments to the landlord that typically occur in the early going, as opposed to those larger amounts down the road. So that's a bit of a protection to the youth and the landlord, that if they're going to kind of miss a payment or toy around with the importance of paying that basic living expense, it'll happen with a low dollar amount where the landlord's probably not going to evict someone over 10% of the rent, but it'll at least be able to be addressed at the program level and with the landlord as well. I should state that the percentages that you see here are very, very, very flexible. So, for example, we have a good number of transgender youth in our program who it's not really realistic for them to be able to get the needed income to pay much of any rent in the early going. It's still not a great employment market for transgender individuals. So a lot of those individuals will hold off on any portion for 6 months, even more, just until they're able to find some type of sustainable employment. And that's a protection with them as well, because I'm sure as you guys are aware of the research that's out there, they're much more prone to engage in survival sex behaviors, those types of very high-risk behaviors, because there's kind of a lack of income-based opportunities for them. So Other reasons that we might look to lower the percentage of a portion of youth is responsible for paying are, it depends on other kind of core expenses that they're paying. So if a youth is paying their own heat and hot water, if that's not included in the rent, we'd make a deduction for that. What we ideally like to see is the youth trying to manage and juggle paying a lot of different bills than just one large bill. And what we found is that that's just a better representation of the skill set they're going to need to practice and get very good at as they become adults, which is what most of us end up doing. Also to highlight is that we, along with the flexibility, we provide a pretty strong incentive-based rent portion payment aspect of it. And we really try to incentivize those protective factors that are going to result in them hopefully becoming more employable and not recycling back into any of the systems. So for example, if a youth decides to go back to school full time, it's very likely, even if they do that at the 7 to 9 month mark where they should be paying 20%, that we'd back way off the rental portion just to support them and then to try to make it serve as an incentive to go back to school to get higher education degrees, high school diplomas, etc. So that's one aspect of how we work the incentives. The other aspect is that we do run a bit of an asset development program as part of our program, where if a youth has demonstrated the ability to pay their rent on time, to pay some of the other core bills on time, like the utilities, we'll offer them the opportunity to pay their rental portions into a savings account versus to the landlord. And the agreement is pretty fixed and firm that they still have to pay it on the same time scale and whatnot. But that's a pretty strong incentive to make payment of rent another priority, and it's essentially money that they get to squirrel away and sit on, and they can only make withdrawals from those accounts with program approval, typically towards other things that will help them progress through an income standpoint. So purchase of a car for youth in this area is just normally out of reach, whereas if we set them up on this type of savings payment plan, they have a legitimate opportunity to be able to afford a down payment on a car, et cetera, which in turn also increases their employability and the ability to get jobs located throughout the state. So some facets like that we use in order to just try to make this, as much as we can, develop some of those long-term protective factors so that way they don't experience any homelessness down the road. We do have flex funding that can cover stuff like security deposit costs, move-in costs, furniture and basic pots and pans are always a must, and help covering some utility costs as well if the youth can't find an apartment with utilities included. So that's pretty much the scope of our financial assistance through the program. In terms of length of assistance, we're pretty much between 1 and 2 years, probably closer to the 2-year mark more than anything else, and that has a lot to do with the renters market out here. It's pretty pricey for a single youth to be able to, or even a parenting youth, to be able to afford a rent on their own. I think our average wage, our minimum wage is $9.60 out here. So when you're dealing with rents of over $850, it does get a little tricky. We do revisit the rent amounts monthly, so despite the fact that we present the youth with this, with those percentages in the early going, it is something that we check back in with once a month, and really looking to see if we need to adjust based on circumstances, et cetera. Let's see. Portions can be increased. We've had youth who have started off and been able to get decent paying jobs fairly on. And when we do that, we usually do that in coupled with the savings program where they can pay themselves. So that way it's at least a little bit softer. And ideally we can try to cycle them through our program before that 2-year time period. Let's see. Extensions are given case by case. We offer up to a 3-month extension, but the youth really has to be able to put together a proposal to do this, a clear plan, something that's going to help them become self-sufficient within that time frame. So that's pretty case by case. In terms of funding sources, we are state funded and with occasional tiny small private funding here and there. In terms of progressive engagement, that's probably one of the more difficult aspects of having what we present to be a fairly set payment structure in terms of the percentage of rent that they'll pay over time. Is that it can be a bit of a barrier in terms of getting people through in faster than 2 years' time. So we don't have any specific assessment tool or method, but our considerations when trying to sort out how long the assistance should last, should it go up to the full 2 years, could it be under a year, tends to have a lot to do with the length of time that they're continuously employed. Employment stability is a very big part for us in terms of trying to determine how long they should be in our program when they can financially suffice for themselves. And looking at the ratio between their take-home income and their core expenses. The core expenses being obviously rent payments, utilities, but sometimes even the expenses that they pay that are getting them more income. So stuff like the monthly car payment, insurance rates are sky high out here as well. So really trying to consider that in terms of the length of time that will provide assistance. And also, because it's not all how much money they make, but their ability to spend it. And I think that's a large part that we spend a good amount of time with our youth on, which is developing that financial literacy and seeing how successful they are at prioritizing their bills and kind of protecting themselves against some of the financial pitfalls that could result in a return to homelessness. So that's pretty much about a brief summary of how our program operates its particular financial assistance.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. It's always great to learn more about your program. And now I will, oh, are you doing it? Thank you. Now we'll have Kathy Tillotson from Build Futures in Huntington Beach, California. Kathy, tell us about what the rent and move-in assistance package is in your program.
Okay, our program is probably a little, is everybody hearing me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Our program's a little different because we're in a very high demand, high rent area. So a one-bedroom here is $1,400 a month, which is way out of the reach of any of the youth that we have. We decided to start with our model of taking every youth who came to us off the street immediately. So the crisis intervention that Cynthia was mentioning earlier is a very significant factor in what we do. We take the kids off the street, usually the same day, but within 24 hours. Every kid who comes to us, and that's straight from the street. Also, a little different than a lot of other places, 90% of those coming to us are not from the foster system, meaning they don't have AB 12 or any kind of extra support or services or funding available to them. So that obviously impacts the financial side of things. So our thing is crisis intervention, stable housing, whatever it takes approach with the goal of job placement and keeping a job, employment stability. So we pay, obviously, since they have nothing, we pay the full amount for a shared room. We've had to because of, again, the low vacancy rates, high rent, high demand in Orange County. Orange County right now currently is about 100,000 units short of affordable housing. Also, a third of the people with housing vouchers cannot get a place to rent to them. So it's a fairly unique market in terms of some of the other locations. So we had to get a little creative. We use shared housing and sober livings. We pay for a room, a shared room in a shared house. So we pay for a bed in essence. We pay the full amount of rent until the youth are able to pay for it themselves. We treat each youth uniquely. We absolutely use progressive engagement, and we are continually determining what rental assistance, but it is a definite whatever it takes kind of approach. So that means they obviously, well, let's just give you an example of our population last year. A third of the kids who came to us were actually heroin or meth addicts at the time, meaning they were active users of heroin and meth. So we actually have houses, some houses we have that will take them. Unfortunately, again, in Orange County, we have a problem. We don't have detox places that take Medi-Cal. So there really is no detox places for them to go, which is another hurdle we face. But of that population, 50% of them were able to become self-sufficient and get jobs and now are doing fine, which is actually a pretty high rate for that population. We also have, obviously, as many of you do, large percentage with mental health issues. We have felons. We take basically, we have no criteria, so they don't even, you know, if their ID or social security card or birth certificate is lost, we still take them in. Obviously that adds to the time to pay rent because we have to get the birth certificate, then get the ID. California is one of the places where you just don't get your ID right that day. You have to wait usually about 2+ weeks for it to come in the mail. So that extends probably by a good 4 to 6 weeks the time that we're paying rent and they cannot get a job or get into a job program. So these are all factors in the rental assistance, but again, we treat each youth in each case uniquely. So it really is a case-by-case basis how much rental assistance we provide. And as long as the youth want to continue working with us, and they do have to be making some type of effort. Obviously in this population there's a lot of stop-starts, failures. They get a lot of chances, so it's definitely more on the harm reduction side model versus consequence-based. But in some situations there are youth who just don't want to do anything at all, as some of you know. So that's how we handle the rental assistance in a very, very tough market. The problem we have is that even in the situations of the shared housing, the landlords don't like this population. They would prefer not to rent to them at all, especially because there's such a low vacancy rate and high demand. So the relationships are critical. At some points it's almost begging them to take one of the kids and give them the bed. So that's what's unique to this population, as all of us who work with them know. But we really have been incredibly successful. We, to date, in the last 4 years, have never turned away a kid who came to us. So that's pretty significant. We hope to maintain that, even though we really don't have staff or any funding other than private funding. But because we use a very flexible, progressive engagement type of model, we've been able to achieve that. And the youth have to pay their rent as soon as they get a paycheck. So we're teaching them that rent is important. You have to know when your rent's due, and the rent is always the first thing you pay for when you get your paycheck. So that's a life skill we feel that they really need to understand, because if they're not going to be housed, they're not going to be able to maintain a job or move forward. So we do actually have them use their whole paycheck as soon as they get it towards their rent, and we're starting from day one budgeting and financial literacy and getting them to understand the finances of living independently on their own and paying their own rent and whatever costs they have. The fact in our situation, we go with kind of, you have to be earning twice what your rent is, so we stress to them that's the case. So that's how we handle the financial assistance. Again, the length of stay is case-by-case basis. We work with them. If they lose their jobs, we'll help them again, just whatever it takes. And the time of stopping assistance is based upon just budgeting, which we work with them on along the way. So once they're able to be independent and pay their own rent, then they're no longer get financial assistance unless something happens.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. And finally, we have Robin Meyer from Northwest Youth Services in Bellingham, Washington, who's going to tell us a little bit about how their financial assistance component works. Yep, there you are. Thanks, Robin.
Yeah, thanks, Mindy. Okay, so I will just go through our information here. So our financial assistance is, I believe, similar to Jody Jackson, which she was describing. So we use a rent calculator that's in an Excel document where we input their income and then other household expenses such as childcare. If there are any disabilities, any documented disabilities, we can input a deduction for that as well. And then the utility allowance is factored in there. the youth is asked to pay 30% of their gross income from the last 30 days towards the initial move-in costs, and then at least 30% ongoing towards their rental assistance. I think somebody else mentioned this too, that it's really unlikely that somebody is going to stay below that 30% rent burden of their income. It's just not the reality. Typically, youth end up paying between 50 to 70% of their income towards rent and utilities. We are able to help connect youth with utility assistance if they need that, and many times they do, especially right at the first move-in to get the account set up. We use the step-down approach, so we basically talk with the youth right at the very beginning before they enroll in the program that the expectation is that at the end of their time in the program they are paying full rent and have full financial responsibility for their bills, and so the size of the steps is really dependent on that youth in particular. So very flexible progress on how much it's increasing by depending on their progress towards their goals, but we're assessing that pretty much at every case management appointment, and then so increasing the youth payment and then decreasing our subsidy. Those steps do not always go in one direction. If something happens, like a youth loses their job or has some other expenses that they've shared with the case manager, whether that's court fees, debt to get a vehicle back, something like that, the case manager can work with them to increase the rent payment so that they can take care of that other expense that might keep them from moving forward. So that's really done on a case-by-case basis as well. Length of assistance, we can go up to 2 years. Our average assistance is, I think, 8 or 9 months at this point. We talk with them about really how long they think they're going to need right at the beginning, and then we assess it every 3 months. Every step of the way, there's collaboration between the case manager and the client themselves. I love what somebody said earlier about kind of flipping that statement of that we're setting them up to fail by flipping it to providing them the opportunity to succeed. We try to incorporate that, from day one with the client. What we've run into is that often the client is already nervous enough and has probably not experienced success many times in their life, and so this is a really great opportunity for us to kind of frame it from the beginning and say, this is an opportunity for you to grow towards the things you're wanting to do. Yes, we do use progressive engagement with services and the assistance on a case-by-case basis, so tailoring the funding and the amount of assistance to each youth specifically. The actual requests for assistance are done in 3-month increments. So the first request, if the landlord is asking for deposit first and last, that is the first request. And then the client would meet with the case manager again halfway through that month to talk about what the plan is for the next 3 months. Concrete tools we use, the rent calculator, which I was describing above, which basically kicks out the minimum client payment. Attendance logs, we can use those in case management, job search tracking sheets. We do a lot of budget and financial literacy work. Youth come in wanting to work on budgeting. They know it's a skill that they need to develop, and this program and this model, I think, provides some really very realistic opportunities to do that, and the kind of the safety net of when there's mistakes made. Those really can be learning opportunities, and we can help minimize the consequences. Some of the questions that it doesn't look like I got answers to in here, but I saw other folks talking about our funding sources. We get funding through the Emergency Solutions Grant, through our county health department, and then through the city of Bellingham as well. So we have kind of that combination of larger federal funding and some more local, much more flexible funding, which is a great combination. That flexibility really is key. I think that's kind of all I've got.
Yep, that's it. We managed to get all of yours on one slide.
Oh, great,
and
great.
Thank you for pointing out, yeah, we apparently left off the funding part. So thank you, Robin, and thanks, everyone. I actually wanted to let everybody know, I think that we do have some of the tools that Northwest Youth Services has developed on our website, and I think Jen may have posted them on the Facebook group as well. So in any case, we'll be gathering together all those tools and all the other tools that other folks are using to add to a toolbox for youth rapid rehousing. And now we are going to go to the Q&A portion. So we have a lot of great questions, and this time it's Ask a Provider and Cynthia from our capacity building team, who will be joining us as well. So actually the first question, Cynthia, is for you. Did we get everybody unmuted? Okay. So you mentioned that households with zero income have often been successful in rapid rehousing. Can you just tell us a little bit more about how that works, maybe some examples that you have from the field about programs that are doing that and doing that well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the providers on the phone probably have plenty of examples as well. I think what we see, just data-wise, you know, when we look at programs that and sort of largely funded programs, one of the things I'm thinking about are, you know, when we look at sort of system-wide data across a particular community, is that when people come in with, you know, $0 to less than $500 of income, the exit rates to housing are still, you know, are still really, really high, like above 65–70%. People are still, in other words, they stay in the program and they are in their permanent housing at the end of that program, even though they came in with no income. And I think with youth, I have to, I would say a majority of people probably come in with zero income or very, very little income. And the idea is that the program is there to kind of help lift people to the place where they will be able to get income, and they might need a longer amount of assistance because they are starting with no income versus someone who, say, is coming in with some kind of benefits or already has some kind of employment. They do say you just give them you know, a little bit longer, or they're paying less towards their rent, you know, themselves in the beginning, and that they are, you know, the characteristics of barriers. In other words, like take a household or a person with lower barriers versus someone who has more challenges. We don't really see a lot of difference in the housing outcomes. We just see, you know, they might need support services, they might need longer assistance, but we don't really see a huge difference. I'm sure providers want to weigh in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think let's go ahead and do that too, and kind of let you guys talk about in your individual programs, and we'll probably just go down the list that I'm looking here in just the same order that we went for the presentations. How many of the young people that you guys are serving come in with zero income? And can you talk a little bit about the work that you start doing from the beginning to try to increase their income? Jody, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I would say the majority of clients have no income. Definitely over half probably come in with no income, and those that do come in with income, it's, you know, maybe a few $100s in ADC or temp work. It's rare that we get somebody that's fully employed full-time in the program. So I'm sorry, what was the follow-up? How do we address that?
Yeah, and I think Cynthia's probably right. You all kind of have the same story on this for young people, particularly just because of where they are in their employment journeys. So just a little bit about this gets more into the case management piece, I'm sure, but the work that you start with from the beginning to start building income.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're a housing first program, so we kind of work with everybody where they're at. I mean, most people, they obviously have a goal. They don't want to continue to have no income, so we work with them to set some individual goals to gain employment, and with the youth, just lots and lots of skill building. So we generally just meet with them more frequently in the beginning, and might start off maybe meeting weekly, so that you can kind of break down all of that into small steps and have a chance to go through with them and help them figure out what a resume is and how you go online and what sites you go to online. So yeah, lots of groundwork.
Great, thank you. And John, how about for you guys, percentage starting with no income and work that you do to increase income?
Yeah, and without having the numbers right in front of me, the last time I checked, there's about 90% of our youth have zero income at program entry. And so first and foremost, we kind of get a roof over their head, because a lot of it is just the lack of environmental stability that they're experiencing. So we're usually able to get them in an apartment within the first 30 days. And then, I mean, within the first 90 days of admission, I want to say it was like 85% of our youth either obtain employment or, in our opinion, more importantly, get involved in some type of educational or vocational program. because we do want to see their potential for earning go up early on. And so there's a lot of case management. Once they're housed, the case management focus is pretty heavily on either education or employment, with a lot of things like just resume building, role plays, trying to help them get an understanding of better understanding of what kind of jobs they'd like, they'd be good at. And that seems to be the particular recipe that we've developed over the years.
Great, thanks, John. And next up we have Kathy from Build Future. And I know, Kathy, you have some really important to say about the employment piece. Kathy is actually going to be presenting at our conference in a couple weeks on the work that they do around employment. So, Kathy, the number who are starting with no income at all and the work that you do to connect them to income?
Definitely no one has income. I mean, maybe 1–2% might have some type of income. So they start with nothing, and because we have like virtually no barriers to entry, again, we take everyone. So depending upon what the situation is, depending upon what the initial, but we have very, very intense case management, I mean daily case management with them, and a lot of what we find is the soft skills, the job readiness training is critical, and obviously if there's a substance abuse issue, that has to be considered in the job readiness, skill-based life skills, those type of things. So it's very intense case management, but that being said, we've had a pretty good success rate. Again, it's a little lower with the ones who are actually addicts when they come, so it's about a 50% employment. And then the others, it's probably close to about 75%, but again, we have such low barriers to entry. And we're hoping to keep increasing that. But the job readiness, job skill training, but the key after the housing is definitely employment, 100%. We want them paying their own rent within 90 days. And we are having a lot of success with that. We work with outside. We don't duplicate anything exists, so we work very closely with the WIOA programs and virtually any programs that are doing that job readiness, job skill training, that type of thing.
Great, thank you. And Robin, how about you guys up in Bellingham? Numbers starting with no income and work that you do to get them income.
Yeah, so similarly, we probably see the majority of our youth come in with very little or no income, and I would just take a guess at probably like 75–80%, just taking a stab at that. The work that we do, I would say, just builds on what the youth is walking in the door already saying they want, which is often they want this program, they want the housing, and they want to be able to support themselves in it, and so making a plan based on that. We work with the outside vocational services in our area. I think the unique thing that we are able to offer are some youth jobs internally. We have a vocational training program in the form of a garden next door that youth can practice at, and it's really just the chance for them to kind of be in a safe environment and practice some of those soft skills, practice interviewing, get feedback about how they interviewed, again, just with that safety net there in place with relationships that they are comfortable in already. And we have a lot of youth who start in that job, and the hope is that not that they stay in that job for a long time, but that they are able to go from kind of our internal employment and then out into the community, and then we can provide a reference as well. So that's been a really big success for many of our youth who don't have work history or maybe the confidence to go and step out into the employment field.
Great, thank you. And I think once we start talking, as you guys have already alluded to, this core component and the financial assistance part inevitably leads into questions about the third core component, which is case management, and it becomes such an important piece of the puzzle for young people particularly, I think. Several folks just had questions about wanting to learn more about your particular programs and related to that kind of stuff. Can each of you talk about your average caseloads for your programs, and then also whether or not you conduct follow-up after young people have exited assistance, either financial assistance or case management assistance? So again, that's average caseloads in your rapid rehousing programs, and then the follow-up that you do. Jody, we'll start again with you.
Our caseload in the youth program is about 1 to 20. And our other rapid rehousing programs is 1 to 25, so just a little bit lower, but not too much lower. Follow-up, we offer aftercare for up to 6 months. So it's just kind of up to the youth on if they're interested in it, and we're kind of flexible in what that looks like. So we kind of give them an option that if they want to check in over the phone, they can. If they want to continue meetings, then we can do that, and we usually try to step those down. If they're continuing to need ongoing services after that, then we try and get them connected with a long-term community support worker. Most people probably opt to just check in over the phone, and then if a problem arises, then they might want to set up a meeting, but most people opt for that option. I mean, we do check our recidivism rates through HMIS, but that's the service piece that we offer aftercare-wise.
Great, thank you. And what is your return to homelessness rate? Do you know that right offhand?
I want to say 89%.
I mean, that don't return to homeless, right?
Right, yes. No, not that they return 89.
I do that all the time. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. And next we'll move, same question for John. Lots of questions about caseloads in rapid rehousing and methods of follow-up after ending assistance.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd say our average caseload is usually one case manager would have a caseload of about 10 to 12. That's subject to variance, I mean, based on the intensity of the service needs of the youth of the individual caseload, because there are some youth that need to be seen almost on a daily basis versus some that can be spaced out quite a bit more, and just from a functional perspective. But typically we try to shoot for between 10 to 12. And in terms of follow-up after discharge, we do try to follow up with our youth after discharge, usually around 90 days and 6 months. But we also host client advisory committee meetings that they're encouraged to continue to attend to help shape the program and its function and how it rolls. But engagement in the aftercare services piece is fairly hit or miss. By that point, it's typically they've had 2 years of us and are ready to kind of go out into the world and not have to keep meeting with managers. So we're still trying to develop the aftercare part, and then seeing, you know, being able to track things like if returns to homelessness and just see how they end up several years down the road.
Do you have data on that yet about your program from HMIS on returns to homelessness?
No, we are, it's because we're state funded and not HUD funded, we actually haven't been entering data into HMIS, but we're in the process of changing that. One of the reasons being is that we want to be able to show that several years down the line that they're not recycling back into the mainstream homeless system. So that's a project that we're undertaking over the next couple of months or so. So hopefully we'll have some more concrete data on that.
Awesome. Great. And Kathy, same question for you. Can you talk about your caseloads, average caseloads, and then any follow-up that you guys do, ability to track returns to homelessness?
Well, we have, because we have no funding, so we have very large caseloads. Last year we helped 240 kids and housed 110 in rapid rehousing. So that number is probably going to increase 40% this year. So at any point in time, there's close to 30 to 50 going on, but then you have your past clients. So it's kind of like a doctor. You've got your patients, but then you've got the ones who come back. In terms of tracking and outcomes, again, we sort of have to treat it. We treat a little differently between those, like I said, who were addicts versus the ones non-addicts, even though majority, all of them have mental health issues of some type. We don't break that out. But we do have a Salesforce database, so that is, like John said, one of the projects that we are working on is getting more data on this. And since we've been tracking for about 4 to 5 years, we have quite a lot of data, and we're trying to really get some good data on all these numbers and what's happening. But we also do something, again, trying to follow up with them is difficult because obviously the phones don't change. We use email. One of the things that we do that is helping a little bit is we send out weekly job leads. So even to the people who've left our program, we send out job leads, and oftentimes that will encourage them to keep us on the mailing list and occasionally come back in touch with us. So we're still working on that, as John mentioned.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. That's actually a really cool tip. Robin, for Northwest Youth Services, average caseload, mechanisms for follow-up, returns to homelessness. I know you guys are in HMIS, right? You're HUD funding.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, average caseload is 14 to 16 youth, and each case manager actually works in multiple housing programs. So they'll have a few clients who are looking for housing, a few in transitional living, and then a few rapid rehousing clients. But that's our average caseload. Aftercare, we do offer aftercare. You know, somebody mentioned that it depends. You know, some youth want to stay in touch. Some youth are really ready to move on and not have to contact the case manager, and that's great. We have looked at our recidivism rates, and I believe last time we looked, it was about 10 to 15%. Return to homelessness, and I need to look that up more recently, but that's based on our coordinated entry system, and so we can look even as a community if the youth re-entered homelessness and is accessing services either with us or with somebody else.
Great, thank you, Robin. Another question that a lot of folks had, and all of you kind of talked about this a little bit when you were doing just kind of your overview of your financial assistance packages. So this is, I'm sure, a really important part of, it's kind of the bridge between this core component and the case management, which is financial literacy and budgeting work that you do with young people. So again, each of you kind of just talked about it in the bullets that were on it, but some of the attendees had questions to want to know more about financial literacy services that you do for young people, budgeting tools that you use. So if each of you could talk a little bit more about that, kind of describe them more, or if there's some particular tools that you like that other people can access, just share those. So again, we'll go down the list with Jody. Financial literacy tools, budgeting?
It's really just based on the client and their need. We don't necessarily assume that there's an issue when there's not one. So it really depends on the client if they're struggling in that area. We have a lot of different tools that we use, but not necessarily a set curriculum or anything. Like I said, a lot of our youth don't come in with anything, so budgeting isn't an issue on the front end because there's not much of anything to budget. But it's pretty, I mean, employment and budgeting are probably the top skills that we're working with people on. But how it's addressed just depends on the youth. So some people like doing an actual budget. Some people like breaking it down weekly. Some people it's just coming up with systems to help them set up an account and pay all their bills one day or get money orders or figure out what works for them. So pretty flexible just depending on their needs.
Great, thanks, Jody. John, how about for you guys? Financial literacy tools that you guys use, budgeting and case management. Just describe that a little bit more about the way that you do that in your program.
Yeah, sure. I mean, similar to what was said before, with most of them coming in with no income, it's not work that we probably get into until about the second or third month. Some of the stuff that we do is we do it pretty often. So I'd say on a weekly budget, particularly in the early going, on a weekly basis, we're doing budgeting work with them. And I mean, we have kind of a few different generic templates that just help spell it out for them. A lot of it is us kind of checking with the youth to see how what template or what mechanism of tracking spending and doing budgeting is going to be most helpful for their particular learning style. And I'd say a large part of what we do is trying to help them sync up their own personal values, their personal goals, and comparing that to how they're spending their money. Because this is obviously an age group where impulse spending and impulse in general can very quickly take hold and kind of run the show when it comes to money management. So pretty much weekly conversations, just seeing how you felt that they did in terms of managing their money and keeping spending according to what their values are, what their goals are, and just making that as much of a firm thought process for them as is possible. We've had youth who, introduced us to the Mint app. I don't know if you guys know about this, but if you have a youth that has a credit card or some type of debit card account, this thing's a godsend for tracking spending and setting budgets. So really trying to find ways to use technology to our advantage too. Because we have found that some of our youth can actually budget a little bit better that way through technology. But yeah, that's pretty much about it. It's a lot of work in the early going and recognizing that budgeting with this age group has a lot more to do with impulse control than it has to do with numbers for the most part.
Great, thanks, John. Kathy, how about for you and your program? Just describe a little bit the work that you do on budgeting and financial literacy skills.
Well, I agree with John. It's critically important for this age group, particularly because of the impulse control. So we send them to financial literacy classes even prior to them obtaining their first job, but definitely prior to even them getting their first paycheck, we're having discussions and meeting and talking about it. We use some outside resources that will actually work with them for 18 months to 2 years to do a financial plan and budgeting. They actually throw in something that's pretty attractive. If they're working with them with the budgeting, they will actually provide transportation for them to get to work. So it's a pretty cool deal for them, but sometimes even they're resistant to that. So we send them always, they go to multiple financial literacy budgeting classes because they don't always like to be working with us. So we break it up, but it is a critical piece.
Great, thank you. And finally, for this question about financial literacy tools, budgeting, we'll go to Robin from Northwest Youth Services.
Great. We use a lot of different tools as well, and a couple of things that we found have really served us and the youth well. I think just applying the harm reduction approach to finances as well and having really honest conversations with youth about where their money is going. You know, we found on a lot of the worksheets, the budgeting worksheets and templates that are out there, there's not lines for some of the stuff that you spend money on, right? Whether it's cigarettes or alcohol or weed or helping their friends or, buying a meal for their family. Just, yeah, where it's actually going and challenging them to be really transparent with that has helped us have more productive conversations with youth. One of the things we see just a ton is that a lot of youth will spend their money on their friends and helping their friends and family out, and how do we both affirm the value there and challenge the skill set in kind of a sensitive area when that is the culture of where they've been. We also work with youth to set up bank accounts, typically with credit unions. Talk with them about direct deposit, so when they are getting their paycheck that everything's not just cash in hand. That is one way we work with them to reduce that impulsivity, and then setting up bill pay through the bank so that rent is then directly paid from the bank to the landlord. So just reducing the temptation of having a handful of cash when that does happen. And then mint.com, and we've had a lot of youth actually use the website Credit Karma, and we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from them about not really knowing what credit is or how it impacts them. And it can start to introduce the longer term thinking and planning. And youth have actually it kind of sparked a few of them to really address their income and their budgeting and financial literacy in a different way because they can see the longer term impact. Visually, both of those websites have some really great visual aids, which is just a different way, and in a lot of ways a more age appropriate way to talk about finances. So we've had some good luck with those two websites.
Thank you. That's actually on my list now for after this webinar is over to go Google Mint. That's the first I've heard of it. I may also have some impulse spending problems.
It really does help you track. I use it myself now too, and I'm like, ooh, too much money on coffee.
Oh, that's so funny, John. I just had a conversation with myself today about how much I spend at Starbucks.
Yes.
And I'm doing this at 40, not in my early 20s. Okay, we have, I want to do one more question for you guys on this session. I know it's been a little longer than the last one that we did, but we've had lots of questions about this core component. So one more question for this section of the webinar is, can each of you talk about, for those young people who are nearing the end of assistance and who don't have enough income yet to sustain the apartment that they're in, if you have those young people, can you talk about the mechanisms that you use to make sure that they don't then become homeless again? So this is kind of like on Cynthia's slide about progressive engagement. That last session, that last section of the rapid rehousing assistance where it's like, okay, this is not working and probably not going to work in the short to immediate term after assistance is over. So can you talk about what your programs do for those particular young people, that subset of young people for whom this is probably not going to work? Jody, we'll start with you.
Yep. So like I said, our program can go up to 12 months. So generally when we hit 6 months, if somebody's not making much progress, isn't looking close to discharge, is when we start to get concerned that maybe the initial plan isn't working too well. So usually at that point we'll start helping them applying for long-term subsidized housing programs. We have a general assistance program that can help single individuals with rent payments. Sometimes that requires rehousing them, however, to get into a unit that is within the guidelines of our general assistance. So that's an option too. Rarely we could look at PSH, but especially for the youth, that generally doesn't come through because ours is through a coordinated entry, which prioritizes chronic. And a lot of our youth hadn't been homeless. They're not old enough to be homeless long enough to be chronic. Or if they are, they just aren't chronic enough and don't hit the top of the list. So that generally isn't an option that comes through in time to bridge them over to something else. But subsidized housing options, there's some youth-specific subsidized housing, so sometimes we're able to get something through. And we still work on their initial plan. We just try to start getting some apps pending because there are some long wait lists for some of those, and they don't always come through in time. So at that point, we start talking to them about, let's look at some backup options, or let's get creative about what could happen if your first option doesn't, line up the way that we thought it might. So.
Great, thank you, Jody. John, how about for you guys? So I know that your program probably has, so far of all the programs that I've looked at, you're on the longer end of the spectrum for assistance anyway. But what about those young people who are nearing the end of your max assistance, who it's just looking like it's probably not going to work after assistance ends? What do you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, we do see a fair number of that, particularly with our parenting youth, because the barriers are just different for parenting youth in terms of employment, income, expenses, et cetera. So normally we'll be able to identify that, I'd say usually about the 1 year mark, whether it's feasible. Yes, they're going to be able to afford this place on their own. No, they're not. And then very quickly start planning with the youth. I mean, we'll help them apply for long-term assistance programs, but there's wait lists that make that pretty unfeasible. There's definitely pretty much no permanent supportive housing in our state that a youth could have access to because of prioritization with chronic homelessness. So for the most part, as I spoke to at the last webinar, we do look for essentially roommate situations that they might be able to put together, shared living arrangements that we can help assist on. And I'd say that's probably been the primary outlet for those youth that aren't going to be able to afford the rent on their own, but who can definitely afford some rent. They're certainly able to live independently. It just becomes more of a financial barrier at that point. So really trying to work with them to look at their own personal natural resources, any friends, extended family members, that kind of stuff that we can try to help bridge the gap with to see if there's potential for them to go on an apartment together or even live with them and pay rent, which we've also found to be a pretty age-appropriate option as well.
Right, that's a great idea. It's also an option for rapid rehousing too. Okay, next, Kathy, for the youth that are nearing the end of assistance from you guys, and I know that you're serving a pretty distinct population as you described in Orange County. So can you talk just a little bit about when you're getting near the end of assistance for those young people who look like they're probably not going to be able to sustain housing, what you do?
Well, again, we use progressive engagement, and since we're placing them initially because of the high cost of the housing in the shared housing, shared room type of situation, they can afford it. So we're placing them right away in a situation that they can afford. So we're pretty much, it doesn't get to the point of being like towards the end or anything. We're working with them now. If there's things like mental health issues, obviously we're working on possibly getting them into a FS full service program, mental health program, which is long waiting lists and difficult to do. Actually, now they're requiring they have 3 hospitalizations before they get in. So it's very difficult, and same as everyone else has said, getting into PSH is really not an option. So it's a dilemma for those that have very severe mental health situations or are still addicts and things like that. But in terms of the others, we don't have that problem because we're placing them in housing they can afford initially.
Great, thanks, Kathy. And finally, we'll end with Robin. And one thing I always like to highlight with your program, Robin, is that you guys are going into the rapid rehousing for youth, serving chronically homeless young people. So talk about what it looks like towards the end of it.
Yeah, definitely. Some of our youth absolutely have been chronically homeless. And I think, you know, for us it's about at that 9-month or 1-year mark. If a youth has not made significant progress towards increasing their income enough that they're going to be able to afford housing once we're gone, we start talking with them about backup plans and stability plans and what family friend resources they might be able to get in touch with, roommate options, more affordable options. You know, we keep an eye out with them for other units that might be more affordable. We talk with them about other parts of town that might be more affordable. So it's that really intensive problem solving where it's, you know, rather than increasing the income where that might not be feasible, just switching the conversation or the focus of the conversation to how do we change the actual rent burden, the rent amount one way or the other. You know, we don't have a lot of permanent supportive options in our community either for youth, but we do look at other more highly intensive, more supportive models in our community, whether that's mental health-based housing or just other options like that might be available. But most often we're talking with the youth about, you know, how they can connect with a friend or a family member or other services.
Great, thank you, Robin. Again, that's a really smart response, I think. Okay, thank you, everyone, for that great discussion. I did want to take a little bit of time today since, as you all know, I had a technological problem on our second webinar, the first time we tried to launch that. So we missed the chance to talk about your responses to the first assignment, which was about the key challenges that are facing your programs or your COCs in implementing youth rapid rehousing and your ideas for overcoming those challenges. And we got so many great responses to this assignment. And you know, we had them on the slides last time, but we kind of had to rush through them. Actually, I don't think I talked about them at all. I just kind of clicked through them. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time today to make sure that I was able to let you guys know and talk a little bit about the great responses that you had. So this will be just an overview of what your responses were to that first assignment. First of all, of course, many of you talked about the challenges of rapid rehousing as a housing first model and learning how to implement a voluntary services approach. A lot of you shared some really cool ideas for how you've been overcoming the challenges of that. And here are just a few of them, and we're still pulling together a lot more to try to get this into a coherent document. So offering incentives for young people for engaging, things like gift cards. One program engages young people in the hiring process for case managers. Another person talked about how shifting to housing first really is about changing philosophical approaches and really thinking differently about where the burden for engagement lies, that it's on the program for making the program engaging and not on the young person to engage. And other people talked about that even when you're setting an expectation of meeting, for case management meeting, that really sticking to the tenet of not exiting someone into homelessness for not engaging. Another really big challenge in implementing youth rapid rehousing and in all rapid rehousing is working with landlords. But again, you guys had really great ideas for how to overcome that challenge, including increasing security deposits, paying first and last and double security if necessary to really convince the landlord. You want to seek out landlords who have numerous properties. A lot of you talked about finding ways to repair units and ensuring landlords that you'll be able to repair. For example, those are risk mitigation funds, and we have a link here to a tool that that USICH pulled together about creating risk mitigation funds. A lot of you also talked about the way that you overcome this challenge with landlords is about educating them about your program, how connecting to your program is really a benefit for landlord. And this relates back to what we talked about in the last webinar on that core component. What landlords want is good neighbors, dependable rent. They want the property to be cared for, and they want to have their units reliably occupied. So it was really about educating landlords about how being a part of your program can help them achieve all of their goals. Also, some of you said that the way that you one of the ways that you overcome this particular challenge is educating landlords about youth development, about the effects of trauma and homelessness on young people. So really lots of great suggestions for overcoming what is like a core challenge of rapid rehousing. Another related challenge that you all described was just in the day-to-day dealing with communication issues with young people and with landlords and between young people and landlords, where you're kind of serving as the mediator for them. And again, you all highlighted that the ways that you overcome this challenge is really about education of landlords, just about youth homelessness in general, about positive youth development approaches, trauma-informed care. A lot of you talked about how you have identified landlords in your community that have demonstrated an understanding about what it's like to rent to young renters and to engage with them. You also talked about how important it is on the other end of that relationship of educating young people about landlord-tenant laws, really getting them to think about things from a landlord perspective and the business model, and just about different communication models. And of course, this is an ongoing challenge for anyone doing rapid rehousing or any kind of housing assistance for people experiencing homelessness, and that is the appalling and growing lack of affordable housing in all of our communities. This is a tough one, and so you guys have actually had some really creative ideas for how to solve them. As you can see on here, one program actually, someone from their program suggested having young people building their own places and funding programs for young people to apprentice with local construction and sustainable technology fields. So lots of really creative suggestions that came up. And of course, roommates. And roommates is the way that many of us deal with affordable housing problems in our communities, myself included. And we had a lot of really great suggestions, and just rather than list them all because there were so many great ones, but there are also a lot of the things that many other communities who aren't even doing youth rapid rehousing have had to kind of come up with. So a lot of similar suggestions have been captured on the link that we have here from our website. Another challenge that a lot of you found in implementing youth rapid rehousing is just restrictive requirements that landlords may have for tenants, including credit checks, rental history, criminal background, lack of employment history, all of those kinds of things. And you all kind of generally agreed that the best way to overcome this challenge is just about landlord education, communicating with the landlord about how the program itself can help them mitigate the risks that they have put in all of these restrictive requirements for in the first place. And we have another challenge here that you guys talked about, which is just the general lack of resource for basic needs that aren't directly related to the rental assistance. So some of you talked about this earlier, application fees, the cost of getting identification, and we just kind of put here for overcoming this challenge, something that USICH pulled together, which is all the ways that some federal resources can be used to fund rapid rehousing. But you all also too have talked about different ways that you use private funding to kind of fill the gaps there. And a lot of programs have developed kind of these flexible funding pools that they use to do to fund those other needs beyond rental assistance that clients have. And finally, we just have here a few other key challenges that folks in communities that are implementing youth rapid rehousing had, including the need to have some kind of standard approach across the community system, and serving young people with little or no income and serious mental health needs, which I think we've covered quite a bit today. For most young people that are going to rapid rehousing, they're starting with little or no income. So that's just a part of what you guys are doing every day, and that really will be addressed a lot more in the next series of webinars, which is about the really important third component of rapid rehousing, which is case management. And everyone just needs to learn a lot more about the intervention. It's still new. We have the great providers that we've had on today and in previous webinars who have been doing this for a while, but for a lot of other you, you're just getting started. So there's going to be a learning curve here. And definitely looking for more technical assistance on helping understand the program model and why it's an effective systems intervention that's able to move more people out of homelessness. And everyone just needs to have at the COC level, particularly, more learning about the characteristics of young people experiencing homelessness and how they are different from adults in the system who are experiencing homelessness. So now community, here's your next assignment. And this is totally timely because as you are all aware, the new HUD NOFA is out. And like last time, there's an increased focus on youth homelessness, including the ability to implement youth rapid rehousing options. So for your next assignment, let us know your big questions about the NOFA and youth rapid rehousing, and we'll work on getting those answered for you at our next online meeting. And we also have a link here for you to learn more just generally about what the new NOFA is and key points about it. So that's all for today's meeting. Thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of this community and for your commitment to learning more about serving young people with this important new resource, rapid rehousing. Here's the date for our next webinar, and we'll get started learning more about the third core component of rapid rehousing, which is case management and services, and how experienced providers implement that core component most effectively for young people in this model. I can tell you already from all the great youth rapid rehousing providers that I've talked to over the last couple years that this component, that third component, is vital in creating a successful youth rapid rehousing program. And I was actually thinking this one is so important that we might want to spend 2 sessions exploring it. But for now, just save the date on this one. And get your responses to either me or Jen on your assignments by August 15th so that we can review those assignments. And again, that's about the new COC NOFA and youth rapid rehousing. So again, thanks for joining us, everyone. Thanks to our provider panelists and to Cynthia for joining us for presentations and during the Q&A. We really love having you all being able to share with the rest of the community your experience. If anyone has any questions or comments before our next online meeting, contact me or Jen anytime. We'll see you soon on the Facebook group or on the next webinar. And for those of you who are going to be in DC in a couple weeks for the Alliance's summer conference, if I haven't met you in person before, come find me. I want to see your beautiful faces. Thanks, everybody.